The day my own family turned against me, that was the day Heather was reborn in the fires of revenge. The laughter echoing from the other room was a knife twisting in my gut, each chuckle a fresh wave of nausea threatening to send me to my knees. They thought they had broken me, reduced me to nothing, a discarded toy they no longer needed. They were wrong, so very wrong. If you've ever felt betrayed by those closest to you, subscribe now to stand with a community that understands true family resilience. The annual family reunion. It was supposed to be a weekend filled with laughter, shared memories, and the comforting embrace of loved ones, a sanctuary from the everyday chaos of life. Instead, it became the backdrop for the cruelest betrayal I could ever imagine. I, Heather, had always prided myself on being the reliable one, the responsible sibling who always had her life together. I worked tirelessly, saved diligently, and built a financial cushion that allowed me a sense of security. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine, earned through years of sacrifice and careful planning. I trusted my family implicitly. That was my fatal flaw. The reunion itself was unremarkable. The usual catch-ups, the slightly embarrassing childhood stories resurrected for comedic effect, the familiar scent of my aunt's infamous potato salad, all the elements of a typical gathering. My brother-in-law, Mark, was his usual jovial self, slapping backs and cracking jokes, seemingly the life of the party. He was married to my sister, Florence, and they had always presented a united front, a picture of suburban bliss. I had no reason to suspect anything amiss, no inkling of the storm brewing beneath the surface. We played cards, we grilled burgers, we reminisced about summers past. The air was thick with nostalgia and the comforting illusion of familial harmony. I even let my guard down, enjoying the moment, believing in the facade. Returning home, exhausted but content, I logged into my bank account to pay a few bills. The screen flashed and my blood ran cold. The balance was wrong, horrifyingly, impossibly wrong. A wave of dizziness washed over me as I stared at the numbers, willing them to rearrange themselves, to revert to the familiar sum that represented my security, my future. But they didn't. My savings, every single penny, was gone. Panic clawed at my throat, choking off my breath. I frantically checked the transaction history, my eyes scanning for any explanation, any sign of a mistake. Instead, I found a series of large withdrawals, meticulously spaced, draining my account with chilling efficiency. Each transaction bore a familiar name, Mark Thompson, my brother-in-law, the jovial, backslapping, seemingly harmless Mark Thompson. I felt like I had been punched in the gut, the air stolen from my lungs. Disbelief warred with a rising tide of fury, a cold, simmering rage that threatened to consume me. I called Florence immediately, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. She answered on the third ring, her tone light and carefree. I blurted out the words, the accusation hanging heavy in the air. Silence. A long, drawn-out silence that spoke volumes, then a nervous laugh. "Oh, that," she said, her voice suddenly strained. "Mark can explain." My heart sank. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a calculated, deliberate act of betrayal. He arrived at my apartment an hour later, his face a mask of false contrition. "Heather," he began, his voice oozing with insincerity, "we need to talk." I crossed my arms, refusing to offer him the comfort of a chair. "My savings, Mark, all of it, gone." He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. Then the smirk, that infuriating, arrogant smirk that revealed the true depths of his depravity. "We needed it more than you," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Florence's business was failing and we couldn't let it go under. You'll be fine, Heather, you always are." He thought I would break, crumble under the weight of his betrayal. He thought I would accept his justification, his condescending dismissal of my hard work and sacrifice. He thought I was weak. That was his second mistake. The person I trusted most, was one of them. The audacity of his words hung in the air, a toxic cloud suffocating any hope of reconciliation. I forced myself to remain calm, to mask the fury that threatened to erupt. "How could you do this, Mark? This was my future." He shrugged, a dismissive gesture that sent shards of ice through my veins. "Consider it a family loan. You'll get it back eventually." The promise was hollow, a blatant lie that only fueled my rage. He left, leaving me standing there, hollowed out and trembling. The walls of my apartment seemed to close in around me, suffocating me with the weight of his betrayal. Sleep evaded me that night. My mind raced, replaying the events of the reunion, searching for any sign, any hint of their deception. But there was nothing, only the carefully constructed facade of familial affection. The financial implications of their theft were devastating. Years of careful saving, of scrimping and sacrificing, were gone in an instant. The security I had painstakingly built vanished, leaving me vulnerable and exposed. I had to swallow my pride and ask for help. My parents, bless their hearts, offered what they could, but their resources were limited. I took on extra shifts at work, sacrificing my free time, pushing myself to the brink of exhaustion. Every penny earned felt tainted, a constant reminder of what had been stolen from me. I confronted Florence again, hoping to appeal to her sense of decency, to remind her of the bond we shared as sisters. But she was resolute, echoing Mark's justifications, her eyes cold and distant. She had chosen him, chosen their financial security over her own sister. The realization was a crushing blow, severing the ties that had bound us for so long. I tried to reason with them, to negotiate a repayment plan, but they were unyielding, their greed blinding them to the consequences of their actions. They had convinced themselves that they were entitled to my money, that my hard work was theirs to plunder. Each failed attempt to resolve the situation chipped away at my spirit, deepening the wound of their betrayal. The stress took its toll. Sleepless nights turned into weeks, the weight of injustice pressing down on me, stealing my joy, my energy, my peace of mind. I lost weight, my clothes hanging loosely on my frame. Dark circles rimmed my eyes, betraying my exhaustion. My friends noticed, expressing their concern, but I brushed them off, unwilling to burden them with my problems. I was ashamed, humiliated by what had happened, unwilling to admit the extent of my devastation. The laughter echoing from their social media posts felt like a personal attack, each smiling face a reminder of their callous disregard for my suffering. They flaunted their lifestyle, posting pictures of lavish dinners, weekend getaways, and expensive purchases, all funded by my stolen savings. The injustice was unbearable, a constant source of torment. I considered legal action, consulting with a lawyer to explore my options. But the process was daunting, the costs prohibitive. Mark had cleverly structured the withdrawals to avoid raising red flags, making it difficult to prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The lawyer warned me that the case could drag on for years, draining my remaining resources and causing further emotional distress. I felt trapped, powerless against their calculated scheme. The world seemed to spin around me, a vortex of despair threatening to pull me under. I questioned everything, my judgment, my trust in others, my very worth. Had I been naive, foolish to believe in the goodness of people? Had I been too trusting, too willing to see the best in those around me? The answer I knew was yes. But I refused to let their betrayal define me. I refused to succumb to despair. Deep within me, a spark of defiance flickered, a burning ember of determination. They may have stolen my savings, my security, my peace of mind, but they would not steal my spirit. I would not let them break me. I would not let them win. As the days turned into weeks, I began to formulate a plan. It wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to reclaim what was rightfully mine and expose their deceitful actions to the world. The rage that had threatened to consume me was now channeled into a laser-like focus, a burning desire for justice. I would make them pay. The days that followed were a blur of exhaustion and despair. I felt like I was drowning, gasping for air in a sea of injustice. The weight of their betrayal pressed down on me, suffocating my spirit, stealing my will to fight. I lost interest in everything, my hobbies, my friends, even my work. The vibrant colors of life seemed to fade, replaced by a dull, monotonous gray. I stopped eating, my appetite vanishing, leaving me weak and listless. Sleep offered no respite, my nights filled with nightmares of Mark's smirking face and Florence's cold, indifferent eyes. I was a shadow of my former self, a hollow shell haunted by the ghosts of my stolen future. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift at work, I came home to an empty apartment. The silence was deafening, amplifying the loneliness that gnawed at my insides. I sank onto the couch, the weight of the world crushing me. Tears streamed down my face, a torrent of grief and anger and despair. I felt like giving up, like succumbing to the darkness that threatened to engulf me. What was the point of fighting? They had won. They had taken everything from me, leaving me with nothing but pain and bitterness. The thought was a seductive whisper, promising an end to my suffering. I could just disappear, vanish without a trace, leaving them to enjoy their ill-gotten gains. The world would be better off without me, a burden lifted from its shoulders. I sat there for hours, lost in my dark thoughts, the line between reality and despair blurring. The apartment grew colder, the shadows deepening, mimicking the chill that had settled in my heart. I closed my eyes, imagining the release, the sweet oblivion of non-existence. But then a flicker of defiance ignited within me, a tiny spark of resistance against the encroaching darkness. I thought of my parents, their unwavering love and support, their sacrifices to provide me with a better life. I thought of my friends, their concern and loyalty, their willingness to stand by me in my time of need. And I thought of myself, the woman I had once been, the woman I still could be if only I had the strength to fight. They had hurt me, yes, deeply, irrevocably, but they had not broken me. They had underestimated my resilience, my capacity for survival. I would not let them win. I would not let them steal my life. I would not let them extinguish the spark that still flickered within me. I rose from the couch, my legs trembling, my body weak, but my spirit renewed. The tears still flowed, but they were no longer tears of despair. They were tears of anger, of determination, of resolve. I would not give up. I would not surrender. I would fight back. I would reclaim what was rightfully mine, and I would make them pay for what they had done. The plan began to take shape in my mind, a meticulous, carefully crafted strategy designed to expose their deceit and reclaim my stolen savings. I would not resort to violence, to threats, to any illegal activity. I would use their own greed, their own arrogance against them. I would play their game, but I would play it smarter, more ruthlessly. I started by documenting everything, gathering evidence of their betrayal. I meticulously recorded every conversation, every email, every transaction. I researched their business, their finances, their personal lives, searching for any weakness, any vulnerability. I spent hours online, scouring public records, social media posts, news articles, piecing together a comprehensive picture of their world. The more I learned, the more I realized the extent of their deceit, the depth of their depravity. They were not just stealing from me. They were cheating their business partners, defrauding their customers, lying to their friends and family. They had built their lives on a foundation of lies and deception, and I was determined to expose it all. I reached out to my contacts, discreetly gathering information, seeking advice, building a network of allies who could help me in my quest for justice. I was careful not to reveal my true intentions, masking my anger and resentment behind a facade of polite curiosity. I learned to be patient, to be observant, to be ruthless. I was no longer the naive, trusting woman they had betrayed. I was a warrior, armed with knowledge and fueled by a burning desire for revenge. They thought they had broken me, reduced me to nothing. They were wrong. They had created a monster. I smiled, I played their game, but I was recording everything. My phone became an extension of my hand, constantly recording conversations, ostensibly for memories, but in reality to capture their incriminating words. Every boastful comment about their business acumen, every subtle dig at my supposed financial incompetence was meticulously saved. I even managed to accidentally leave my phone recording during a tense family dinner, capturing Mark bragging about how he'd outsmarted someone at work, the arrogance dripping from his voice. It was slow, painstaking work, requiring nerves of steel and a constant awareness of my surroundings. There were close calls, moments where they almost discovered my deception. Once, Florence picked up my phone to take a picture and started scrolling through the gallery, her eyes widening as she stumbled upon a folder filled with audio recordings. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, inventing a flimsy excuse about using it for work memos. She seemed unconvinced, her eyes narrowing with suspicion, but thankfully she let it go. Another time, Mark questioned me directly, his voice laced with suspicion. "What are you really up to, Heather? You've been acting different." I met his gaze, forcing a smile, and deflected with a vague answer about focusing on my personal growth. He didn't press further, but I knew he was watching me, his eyes like those of a predator sizing up its prey. To understand the full scope of their actions, I needed access to their financial records. Simply confronting them wouldn't work. They'd deny everything, and I'd be left with nothing but my word against theirs. I had a friend, Sarah, who worked as a forensic accountant. I knew I could trust her implicitly. I confided in her, explaining everything that had happened, showing her the evidence I had gathered. She was appalled, her face growing darker with each detail. "This is outrageous, Heather," she said, her voice tight with anger. "We need to find a way to prove this." Together, we devised a plan. I would subtly befriend one of Florence's business partners, someone who had access to their company's financial information. It was a risky move, but it was the only way to get the proof I needed. I started attending local business networking events, making connections, and subtly dropping hints about my interest in Florence's business. It took weeks, but eventually I met someone who seemed willing to talk. His name was David, and he was a disgruntled investor who felt he had been cheated by Florence and Mark. He was hesitant at first, but after several meetings, and after I gained his trust, I showed him the evidence I had gathered. His eyes widened as he read through the documents, his face turning red with fury. "I knew it," he exclaimed, his voice trembling with rage. "I knew they were up to something." He agreed to help me, providing me with copies of their financial statements, bank records, and email correspondence. As I pieced together the puzzle, I discovered a web of deceit far more intricate than I had imagined. They had been siphoning money from the business for years, using shell corporations and offshore accounts to hide their tracks. They were not just stealing from me, they were stealing from everyone. The evidence was overwhelming, damning. I had everything I needed to expose them. Now came the hardest part, deciding how to unleash it. I considered going directly to the authorities, but I worried that the legal process would be slow and cumbersome, potentially allowing them to cover their tracks. I wanted to inflict maximum damage, to expose their deceit to the world, to watch their carefully constructed facade crumble before their eyes. I decided to use social media. I created an anonymous account and began posting carefully selected excerpts from the documents I had obtained, exposing their fraudulent activities to their customers, their investors, and their friends and family. I timed the posts strategically, releasing them in waves, creating a snowball effect of outrage and condemnation. The internet exploded. The plan was risky, very risky. If they could trace the posts back to me, the consequences would be severe. But I was careful, using VPNs and encrypted messaging apps to protect my identity. I also made sure to only post information that was already in the public domain, or that I had obtained legally, to avoid any potential legal repercussions. The anticipation was almost unbearable. Every notification, every news alert, sent a jolt of adrenaline through my veins. I knew that the moment of truth was fast approaching, the day when their carefully constructed world would come crashing down around them. I could almost taste it. The avalanche started subtly, a comment here, a share there, but soon the whispers grew to a roar. Old clients started pulling out, citing ethical concerns. Investors demanded answers. Florence and Mark, initially dismissive, started to panic. I watched it all unfold from the shadows, a ghost in their machine, fueling the chaos with carefully timed leaks. Their social media accounts, once gleaming billboards of success, were now battlegrounds of accusations and outrage. Friends and family turned their backs, disgusted by the revelations. The lavish dinners stopped. The weekend getaways ceased. Their perfect world was crumbling brick by digital brick. It was exhilarating watching them squirm, their carefully constructed facade of wealth and happiness dissolving into a toxic puddle of lies and deceit. But I knew this was just the beginning. The real reckoning was yet to come. I needed to corner them, to force them into a position where they couldn't deny the truth, where their only option was to face the consequences of their actions. Their desperation was palpable. They started lashing out, accusing each other of blame, their carefully constructed partnership fracturing under the pressure. I relished every moment. The phone calls began, first subtle inquiries trying to gauge the source of the leaks, then increasingly frantic pleas begging me to stop. They even offered to renegotiate the repayment plan, a pathetic attempt to buy my silence. I ignored them all, savoring their discomfort, knowing that their fear was my greatest weapon. The news articles started appearing, amplifying the scandal, reaching a wider audience. Lawyers circled like vultures, eager to pick at the carcass of their shattered empire. The police began investigating, scrutinizing their financial records, interviewing their business partners. The net was closing in. I knew that I needed to make my final move soon before they had a chance to escape, to disappear with what was left of their stolen fortune. I had been meticulously planning this moment for months, anticipating every possible scenario, preparing for any contingency. I had even created a detailed timeline, outlining each step of the plan, ensuring that everything would unfold with precision and efficiency. The stage was set. The players were in place. It was time for the final act. I knew their biggest weakness, their arrogance. They truly believed they were smarter than everyone else, untouchable, invincible. It was this hubris that had allowed them to get away with their deceit for so long. And it was this same hubris that I would use to bring them down. I crafted an email, carefully worded, designed to appeal to their vanity and their greed. I posed as a wealthy investor, someone who was interested in acquiring their business, someone who was willing to overlook their minor indiscretions in exchange for a substantial return on investment. I praised their entrepreneurial spirit, their innovative business model, their unwavering commitment to success. I offered them a meeting, a chance to discuss the details of the acquisition, a chance to salvage their reputation and their fortune. I knew they wouldn't be able to resist. The meeting was set for a secluded restaurant, a place known for its privacy and discretion. I arrived early, meticulously checking the room, ensuring that everything was in place. I had arranged for hidden cameras and microphones to be installed, capturing every word, every gesture, every nuance of their conversation. I wanted to have irrefutable proof of their guilt, evidence that could be used in court, evidence that could be shared with the world. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. This was it, the moment of truth, the culmination of months of planning, of pain, of sacrifice. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my palms sweating, my body trembling with anticipation. They arrived looking nervous and disheveled, their faces pale, their eyes darting around the room. They tried to put on a brave face, but I could see the fear in their eyes, the desperation in their demeanor. They knew that they were in trouble, that their world was collapsing around them. But they were still clinging to hope, still believing that they could somehow talk their way out of this mess. I greeted them with a warm smile, offering them a drink, trying to put them at ease. I wanted them to feel comfortable, to feel safe, to feel like they were in control. Because the more comfortable they felt, the more likely they were to reveal the truth. We started discussing the details of the acquisition, the financial projections, the business strategy, the potential for growth. They were eager to please, showering me with compliments, painting a rosy picture of their company's future. They downplayed the recent scandals, dismissing them as minor misunderstandings, isolated incidents, exaggerated rumors. But I pressed them, gently but persistently, asking pointed questions, probing for inconsistencies, exposing the cracks in their carefully constructed narrative. And then I dropped the bomb. I told them that I knew about their deceit, about the stolen money, about the fraudulent activities. I presented them with the evidence I had gathered, the documents, the recordings, the testimonies. Their faces drained of color. Their eyes widened in disbelief. They were caught, cornered, exposed. Mark lunged across the table, his face contorted with rage, his hands outstretched. "You set us up," he hissed, his voice trembling with fury. Florence sat frozen, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth agape. "How could you do this to us?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I remained calm, unfazed by their anger, their desperation. "I'm simply giving you the opportunity to tell the truth," I said, my voice steady and firm. "To confess your crimes, to apologize for your actions, to make amends for the harm you have caused." They refused, of course. They denied everything, blaming each other, accusing me of conspiracy. But their denials were weak, hollow, unconvincing. The evidence was overwhelming. Their guilt was undeniable. I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "I'm afraid I cannot do business with such untrustworthy individuals," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "I suggest you contact a lawyer." "You're going to need one?" I turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Oh, and one more thing," I said, turning back to face them. "Everything we discussed here has been recorded, and it will be shared with the authorities and with the world." Their faces crumpled. Their eyes filled with despair. They knew that it was over. They had lost. The next morning, the recordings were released. The world watched as their lies unraveled, as their deceit was exposed for all to see. The fallout was swift and brutal. Their business collapsed. Their assets were seized. They were arrested and charged with multiple felonies. Their reputation was ruined. Their lives were destroyed. And me, I just smiled. But the game isn't over yet. I have a few more cards to play, and the next one will make everything that's happened so far seem like a child's game. The day they tried to truly end me is the day they signed their own doom. The news of their downfall spread like wildfire, amplified by every social media platform, every news channel, every gossiping mouth. But the true nuclear option, the one I had been saving for last, was about to detonate. It wasn't just about the money they had stolen or the business they had ruined. It was about the ultimate betrayal, the attempt to silence me permanently. The police investigation, now fueled by the evidence I had provided, unearthed something far more sinister than mere financial fraud. They discovered the emails, the coded messages, the burner phones, all pointing to a meticulously planned scheme to make me disappear. They had hired someone, a discreet professional, shall we say, to ensure my silence. Permanently. The evidence was irrefutable. The hitman, facing a mountain of evidence against Florence and Mark, turned informant and sang like a canary. He revealed everything: the initial contact, the agreed-upon price, the planned method. He even had recordings of his conversations with them. The world gasped. This wasn't just about greed. It was about malice. It was about a cold-blooded plot to remove me from existence. The crimson liquid of their downfall stained everything they touched. Their friends abandoned them, their family disowned them. They became pariahs, whispered about in hushed tones, their names synonymous with treachery and deceit. Florence, once a picture of polished perfection, was now a shell of her former self, her face etched with worry, her eyes haunted by the fear of imprisonment. Mark, the arrogant, self-assured businessman, crumbled into a sniveling mess, begging for forgiveness, pleading for leniency. But there was no forgiveness, no leniency. The wheels of justice turned inexorably, grinding them into dust. Their lawyers, initially confident, grew increasingly grim as the evidence mounted. Plea bargains were offered, then withdrawn. The trial became a media circus, with every sordid detail dissected and analyzed. The prosecution painted them as monsters, devoid of empathy, driven by greed and a thirst for power. The defense, desperate to salvage something, anything, argued that they were victims of circumstance, that they had been driven to extremes by financial pressures. The jury didn't buy it. They were found guilty on all counts. The judge, showing no mercy, handed down the maximum sentence. Decades behind bars, their empire was gone, their freedom was lost, their reputation was shattered. They had lost everything. I watched it all unfold from a distance, a quiet observer, a silent architect of their destruction. There was no joy in my heart, no sense of triumph, only a profound sense of emptiness. The anger that had consumed me for so long had finally dissipated, leaving behind a void. I had achieved my goal. I had exposed them, punished them, brought them to their knees. But the victory felt hollow, tainted by the pain and suffering that had preceded it. The experience had changed me, hardened me, left me with scars that would never fully heal. I had seen the darkness that lurked within human hearts, the depths of depravity to which people could sink, and I knew that I would never be the same again. I walked away from the wreckage, leaving them to wallow in their misery. I started a new life in a new city, surrounded by new friends. I focused on healing, on rebuilding, on finding peace. It wasn't easy. The memories still haunted me, the nightmares still plagued me, but I refused to let them define me. I refused to let them steal my happiness. I had survived. I had overcome. I had emerged from the ashes, stronger and wiser than before. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. It's a bitter medicine, a painful surgery, but sometimes it's the only way to excise the poison and begin to heal. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.